What if wisdom sounds like despair? What if the Bible's most honest voice refuses easy answers? And what if Ecclesiastes is not a crisis of faith, but a map through it? Tonight we enter a book that feels almost too modern, too raw, too unfiltered to be ancient. Many readers were taught to approach Scripture for certainty, yet Ecclesiastes opens with a hammer blow. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Depending on translation, that word can mean vapor, breath, mist, something real but impossible to hold. The teacher, often linked to Solomon, surveys pleasure, work, wealth, knowledge, and legacy, then tells us that under the sun, each triumph slips through human hands. This is not unbelief, it is observation pushed to its breaking point. We are listening to a royal voice that has tested everything and still wakes up asking whether anything lasts. But here's the thing, Ecclesiastes does not invite nihilism, it exposes illusion. Our thesis is simple. Ecclesiastes strips away false promises so we can fear God without pretending life is controllable. And our path is clear. We will trace Solomon and the preacher's voice, confront vanity under the sun, face death, time, and divine judgment, and finally ask what it means to fear God in a fallen world. As we move, stay close to the tension. The preacher says, there is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to laugh, and that rhythm can feel beautiful one day and unbearable the next. He watches the same sun rise over the righteous and the wicked, over the diligent and the lazy, over those remembered and those forgotten. He warns that chasing pleasure alone cannot satisfy the soul, but neither can cold moralism. He urges us to receive bread, labor, friendship, and fleeting joy as gifts, not guarantees. Even justice appears delayed in his world, and that delay creates one of the book's darkest questions. If wrong goes unanswered now, where does hope stand? Ecclesiastes answers carefully, not cheaply. It points beyond immediate outcomes toward judgment that is real, even when not yet visible. So this is not a sermon shouted from a distance. It is a lantern carried through fog. Fear God. Keep his commandments. Not because life is tidy, but because life is not. If you have ever prayed and still felt confused, if you have ever done everything right and still watched things fall apart, this book meets you there. And by the end, the question will no longer be how to control life under the sun, but how to live truthfully before the one above it. Before we can decide whether Ecclesiastes heals despair or deepens it, we have to face the voice speaking to us. Who is this teacher who dares to test everything and still call it vapor? Why does the text sound royal, wounded, observant, and strangely intimate at the same time? The opening line names Koheleth, often rendered as the preacher or teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, and many readers across centuries have linked that profile to Solomon. Yet the book's final literary form may reflect later framing and editorial shaping, which means we should hold both confidence and caution together. We can listen to the Solomonic persona without pretending every historical detail is settled beyond dispute. That tension matters because Ecclesiastes itself trains us to distrust easy certainty. If this is Solomon, then we are hearing a king with resources beyond imagination who discovered that abundance cannot silence mortality. If this is a wisdom voice written in Solomonic style, then we are hearing Israel's tradition perform a daring experiment through a royal mask. What happens when someone with total access to pleasure, projects, power, and prestige reports honestly on the results? In both readings, the testimony lands in the same place. The experiment is comprehensive. Nothing is left untested. Wine, laughter, architecture, labor systems, wealth accumulation, artistic delight, intellectual pursuit, social reputation, strategic excellence, all of it enters the furnace. And the furnace answer is not that these things are evil, it is that they cannot carry the full weight of meaning. That distinction is crucial. Ecclesiastes never says bread is evil, friendship is evil, work is evil, beauty is evil. It says they are gifts with limits. They can nourish, but they cannot save. They can gladden, but they cannot guarantee. They can be received with gratitude, but not worshipped as anchors of ultimate identity. Do you hear the contrast? The modern mind is often trapped between indulgence and cynicism, between I must have everything and nothing matters anyway. The preacher refuses both cages. He neither baptizes desire nor abolishes desire. He disciplines desire by placing it under time, death, and judgment. And this is where the voice becomes unsettlingly current. We still live as if optimization can outrun finitude. We rename control as productivity, distraction as rest, and self-curation as wisdom. The preacher simply asks, what remains when the applause fades? What survives when your best decade is over? What is left of your plans when one diagnosis, one market collapse, one betrayal, one accident, one quiet funeral can rewrite your map? Is this pessimism or is it moral honesty? You can almost feel the text refusing performance. The teacher does not speak like a polished motivator, promising 7 steps to unstoppable outcomes. He sounds like someone who has watched too many cycles repeat. Generations come and go, the sun rises and sets, rivers run to the sea, yet the sea is never full. Human appetite keeps demanding more, and memory keeps dissolving yesterday's victories. He sounds tired, yes, but not empty, disillusioned, yes, but not directionless. There is a difference between shattered illusions and shattered faith. Ecclesiastes pushes us toward the first so we might recover the second. So what do we do with this royal, searching, inconvenient voice? We do not romanticize his despair, and we do not censor his questions. We let him clear the stage. We let him remove our counterfeit gods one by one. We let him ask whether achievement without reverence is just an elegant form of panic. We let him ask whether wisdom used only for self-protection becomes another idol. We let him ask whether our hunger for certainty is actually hunger for sovereignty. And once those questions settle in, the next movement of Ecclesiastes becomes unavoidable, because the teacher names the atmosphere where all these illusions thrive. He calls it life under the sun. What does under the sun actually mean? Is it simply poetic mood or a theological diagnosis? The phrase appears again and again, not to deny heaven, but to describe the human vantage point bounded by ordinary observation. Under the sun is where we count outcomes, track comparisons, and interpret reality by what seems visible and immediate. Under the sun is where the wicked can prosper, the righteous can suffer, and no spreadsheet can explain the moral asymmetry. Under the sun is where effort does not always equal reward, where timing can crush talent, where memory shortens, and where human control proves thinner than we admit. When Ecclesiastes says vanity, we should not hear only emptiness. The Hebrew term hebel points to breath, mist, vapor, something present and real yet elusive, impossible to grasp as permanent possession. This is why the preacher's critique cuts so deeply. He is not saying life is unreal. He is saying life is ungraspable. You can touch it, taste it, lose it, grieve it, cherish it, and still fail to master it. You can build a legacy and watch strangers mismanage it. You can gain wisdom and still be subject to randomness that ignores your preparation. You can do everything right and still bleed from outcomes you never chose. Here's what most people miss. Vanity in Ecclesiastes is not merely an insult to worldly ambition. It is a description of creaturely existence after the fall, where beauty and frustration coexist, where joy and sorrow overlap, and where human beings keep trying to extract eternity from temporary things. The problem is not that work is meaningless. The problem is that work cannot become your Messiah. The problem is not that pleasure is wicked. The problem is that pleasure cannot be your foundation. The problem is not that wisdom fails every test. The problem is that wisdom cannot abolish death. Look at how the book builds this argument through contrasts. Better is one handful with quietness than two handfuls with toil and chasing wind. Better to hear the rebuke of the wise than the song of fools. Better a poor but wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knows how to take advice. Every contrast exposes the same lie. More is always better. Ecclesiastes says no. Sometimes less is clearer. Sometimes limits are mercy. Sometimes ambition without fear of God is just anxiety in ceremonial clothing. And then the preacher walks into one of the hardest observations in all wisdom literature. The race is not always to the swift, the battle not always to the strong, bread not always to the wise, riches not always to the intelligent, favor not always to the skillful, but time and chance happen to them all. That line does not erase responsibility. It erases arrogance. It tells us that competence matters, but control is partial. It tells us planning is wise, but outcomes remain contingent. It tells us we are accountable for faithfulness, not entitled to predictability. Can a person hear that without collapsing? Yes, if they are willing to trade domination for dependence. No, if they insist that meaning only exists where control exists. This is the hidden fork in the road. If your definition of purpose requires guaranteed results, Ecclesiastes will feel intolerable. If your definition of purpose allows for obedience amid uncertainty, Ecclesiastes becomes liberating. The same text that sounds like a funeral to the proud sounds like oxygen to the exhausted. Notice also how often the preacher commends enjoyment. Eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, enjoy life with the wife whom you love. Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. These are not escapist slogans. They are disciplined invitations to receive finite goods as gifts within finite time. Gratitude without illusion, delight without idolatry, action without self-deification. This is not nihilism, it is calibrated realism. But realism becomes sharpest where Ecclesiastes confronts injustice. The teacher sees oppression and tears with no comforter. He sees courts where wickedness sits in the place meant for justice. He sees systems that devour the weak and calls them what they are. Does he offer a simplistic political program? No. Does he deny the horror? Also no. He bears witness. He refuses to flatter power. He names grief as grief. In a world addicted to spin, that alone is moral courage. Still, the ache remains. If evil is visible and often unpunished in the short term, where does hope stand? If under the sun we cannot always trace moral logic from event to outcome, are we left with absurdity? Ecclesiastes answers by widening the frame without pretending to close every gap. God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. That claim does not hand us a timetable, it gives us a horizon. It does not eliminate lament, it rescues lament from meaninglessness. So when vanity under the sun is rightly heard, it does not flatten life into despair. It punctures our delusions and reorders our loves. It teaches us to stop demanding permanence from what was never designed to be permanent. It trains us to hold gifts with open hands. It calls us to patience where outcomes delay, humility where success tempts pride, and honesty where suffering tempts denial. Yet one question keeps pressing from the edges of every chapter. If all our projects end at the grave, how do we live without panic as time moves us there? To answer that, Ecclesiastes takes us into its darkest and most necessary chamber. Death in Ecclesiastes is not an abstract doctrine. It is the great equalizer that drags every human illusion into daylight. The wise die, the fool dies, the rich die, the poor die, the admired die, the forgotten die. One event comes to all. That repetition is not rhetorical excess. It is surgical pressure applied to our fantasies of exemption. We do not like to be reminded that mortality is undefeated in this age. We prefer narratives of ascent, momentum, reinvention. The preacher keeps placing a gravestone in the middle of each narrative and asking, "Now what?" Does that make him anti-life? Actually, the opposite. By refusing denial, he intensifies urgency. Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. The point is not panic productivity. The point is moral seriousness. Time is not an endless reservoir. It is a measured gift. Therefore, choices matter now. Reconciliation matters now. Integrity matters now. Worship matters now. Then comes the poem Many Know, often quoted at weddings and funerals, but rarely felt in full weight. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. These lines are not sentimental decoration. They are theology in rhythm. Human life unfolds in seasons we do not author. We participate, respond, resist, surrender, repent, endure, rejoice, but we do not control the clock. Can this rhythm become an excuse for passivity? Ecclesiastes will not allow that. The same book that honors times and seasons also condemns laziness, folly, and corrupt speech. It rebukes rash vows and performative religiosity. It warns against being quickly provoked in spirit. It observes that money answers many practical concerns, while still denying that money can solve the human condition. Again and again, we are pressed into paradox. Act responsibly, but do not worship outcomes. Pursue wisdom, but do not idolize your insight. Build, plant, labor, love, but do not claim ownership over tomorrow. And what about divine judgment? This is where the book's realism turns moral. If there is no judgment, then delayed justice becomes final injustice. If there is judgment, then delayed justice is still grievous but not ultimate. Ecclesiastes chooses the second path. God has appointed a time for every matter and every work. God will bring hidden things into account. Those statements do not answer every philosophical objection. They answer a more urgent existential demand. Is the moral structure of reality finally indifferent or finally accountable? The preacher says accountable. Not immediately transparent, but accountable. Not always visible now, but accountable. This changes how we endure ambiguity. We are not asked to call evil good while waiting. We are asked to resist evil, lament evil, and refuse cynicism because judgment belongs to God. This is not quietism. It is covenantal sobriety. There is also a haunting line about eternity set in the human heart, yet humans unable to find out what God has done from beginning to end. We sense transcendence, we crave coherence, we reach for completion, and still our knowledge remains partial. Is that cruelty, or is it protection against the old temptation to be like God? Ecclesiastes seems to imply both ache and mercy. We are given enough light to walk, not enough light to dominate. So if death is certain, time is measured, and judgment is real, what posture remains? Not resignation, not bravado, reverence, humility, attentive obedience in ordinary days. This is where the book quietly dismantles performative spirituality. It warns us not to multiply words before God, not to confuse religious noise with reverent listening. It teaches that awe is wiser than theatrics. Few lines are more relevant in an age of constant commentary and spiritual branding. Think of the psychological freedom hidden here. You do not need to prove your worth by endless achievement, because death equalizes all status projects. You do not need to crush others in competition for legacy, because memory fades and judgment belongs to God. You do not need to curate a flawless image, because hidden things are already seen by the one who judges justly. What remains is a life that can be both serious and grateful, urgent and calm, finite and faithful. Yet we still have one final movement to make. and it may be the most misunderstood of all. When Ecclesiastes says, "Fear God and keep his commandments," is that a retreat into religious cliché after pages of radical honesty? Or is it the hard-won center reached only after every illusion has been burned away? To see that, we step into the closing summons. Fear God in a fallen world does not mean panic before a capricious deity. It means reverent alignment with reality as it truly is. God is God. We are not. Life is gift. We are stewards. Time is limited. Judgment is coming. Therefore, obedience is not a strategy for control. It is a response of trust. The book's final call is not master life. It is live truthfully before the one who already masters it. This is why Ecclesiastes can sound severe and tender in the same breath. Severe because it refuses to flatter our idols. Tender because it gives exhausted people permission to stop pretending. If you are tired of formulas that promise guaranteed outcomes, this book is mercy. If you are addicted to self-sufficiency, this book is confrontation. If you are grieving delayed justice, this book does not mock your pain. It places your pain in a larger courtroom, where hidden things will not remain hidden forever. How then shall we live under the sun? Receive daily joys without clutching them. Work diligently without making work your God. Mourn losses without surrendering to nihilism. Speak carefully. Vow carefully, spend carefully, and repent quickly. Seek wisdom, but remember wisdom is a lamp, not omniscience. Practice generosity while you can. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the body bends, before the senses dim, before the years say, "I have no pleasure in them." That poetic portrait of aging is not morbid spectacle. It is compassionate realism. It tells the young that time is moving. It tells the old that they are seen. It tells all of us that creaturely fragility is not failure, it is condition. And yes, there is a pastoral edge here, but keep it brief and clear. You are not asked to carry tomorrow as if you were God. You are asked to fear God today, in this hour, with this breath. Faithfulness is not dramatic most days. It is ordinary obedience repeated under imperfect skies. Now return to the dilemma that has followed us from the first question. Does Ecclesiastes drive us into despair, or does it clear illusions so we can live faithfully without false hope of control? By now the answer should be sharper. Despair comes when we demand from life what only God can give. Freedom begins when we accept limits, receive gifts, and submit outcomes to divine judgment. The preacher is not celebrating meaninglessness. He is dismantling counterfeit meaning so durable meaning can emerge. Consider how each thread has converged. Solomon and the preacher's voice expose the grand experiment of human striving. Vanity under the sun named the vapor-like texture of all finite pursuits when treated as ultimate. Death, time, and divine judgment shattered fantasies of exemption while preserving moral accountability. Fear God in a fallen world gathered every fragment into a livable posture. Reverent obedience, grateful joy, sober patience. Is that too simple for a book this complex? Not simple, distilled. Ecclesiastes does not give a painless world view. It gives a truthful one. It leaves room for unresolved questions, for tears that have not dried, for mysteries we cannot decode. But it refuses the lie that uncertainty cancels responsibility. It refuses the lie that suffering cancels worship. It refuses the lie that delayed justice means absent justice. In this way, the book is both diagnosis and direction, and maybe that is why it has survived so many ages of upheaval. Empires rise and fall, technologies accelerate, economies expand and contract, generations rename their anxieties. Yet the human ache remains recognizable. We still chase wind, we still fear irrelevance, we still confuse visibility with significance. We still wonder whether anything lasts. Ecclesiastes answers with a restrained but unbreakable claim. The fear of God outlasts every trend because it aligns the creature with the Creator. So when night falls and your plans feel fragile, when prayers seem unanswered, when effort appears unrewarded, remember the teacher's hard mercy. Do not call vapor stone. Do not call control salvation. Do not call delay abandonment. Receive what is given. Refuse what is false. Fear God. Keep His commandments, not to force life into your design, but to remain faithful inside God's. And if that is true, then one final question rises from the shadows and follows us forward. If the wisest life is not control but reverence, what will it cost us to surrender the illusions we still secretly love? So where have we arrived? Ecclesiastes asked whether life under the sun is only vapor, and whether that vapor means nothing or means we were holding the wrong things too tightly. The answer is sharper now. This book does not glorify despair. It exposes the illusions that create despair, especially the illusion that meaning depends on control. First, the voice of the preacher, often associated with Solomon, matters because it frames the experiment at full scale. Achievement, wealth, wisdom, reputation, all were tested, and none could bear ultimate weight. Not because they are worthless, but because they are limited. Gifts cannot become gods without collapsing under pressure. Second, vanity under the sun is not a denial of reality. It is a diagnosis of reality as experienced by finite humans in a fractured world. Breathlike, fleeting, ungraspable. Work matters, love matters, joy matters, but none of them can secure permanence. The race is not always to the swift. Outcomes are not always proportional, and justice is often delayed. Ecclesiastes does not hide that wound, it names it. Third, death, time, and divine judgment reorder everything. Death humbles every status game. Time refuses our fantasies of mastery. Judgment preserves moral seriousness when history looks morally uneven. Some historical framing questions remain debated, but the theological center stands firm. If God brings hidden things to account, then faithfulness is never wasted, even when immediate results are unclear. That is why the final call, fear God and keep His commandments, is not a retreat into cliché. It is the only durable posture left after every false promise is stripped away. Reverence over performance. Obedience over self-invention, gratitude over grasping. You are not asked to deny sorrow, and you are not asked to pretend certainty where Scripture itself speaks with tension. You are asked to live truthfully before God when life feels unresolved. If your prayers have felt unanswered, Ecclesiastes does not shame you. If your effort has not produced the outcome you expected, Ecclesiastes does not call you foolish for hurting. It teaches a harder peace. Receive today as gift. Refuse idols politely but firmly, and leave final accounting to the judge who sees what human eyes miss. If this journey helped you see the book with fresh clarity, stay with us for the next episode. Because if Ecclesiastes teaches us to fear God in uncertainty, what happens when another biblical voice demands not reflection, but action in the middle of silence? Take a second, and based on what we uncovered today, answer this in the comments. Do you think Ecclesiastes leads to despair or to honest fear of God? And as always, God bless you.